Hello, everyone, once again. This is Rob, and welcome back to Media Awareness and another film review. It's been a while since I've done one of these. However, it is about time, as we are going to be discussing Dune Parts 1 and 2, or Dune collectively as one film, as it really is one film. Before I get to that, though, a quick reminder the fundraiser continues. For those of you unaware, I am a disabled individual, and I use a motorized wheelchair slash scooter all day, every day for my independence, and I desperately need your help. My insurance will not cover anything with regard to my scooter, as they view it as a quote luxury item end quote. Despite the fact that I'm unable to walk whatsoever, unable to use any other type of power chair, and unable to use a standard wheelchair for that matter, only having primary use of one hand and limited at that. Additionally, I do not have a backup wheelchair or scooter. So if this malfunctions to the point of not being functional, I am a fish out of the water and dependent on people 24/7 for my level of care. Below the title of this video in the description, you'll find a spot fun link. It'll be there as well as in a separate section below that. Any and all help is welcome. I mean that sincerely. I know times are tough for a lot of you right now, so any little bit can help out. I'm endeavoring to refurbish my existing scooter to the point where I don't have to be on pins and needles on a daily basis, worrying about parts malfunctioning and not having replacement parts or the ability to pay the trained technicians to install these replacement parts. That's the goal of the fundraiser to obtain the parts necessary as well as to pay the technicians to install these parts. And I am far from reaching the fundraising goal. The fundraiser has pretty much stalled for the past several weeks, and I really, really want to urge all of you watching to do what you can. If you have not done so already, please contribute. It would really, really help out a lot. Additionally, I do want to thank those who have contributed thus far, in addition to those who plan on contributing, as your contributions have and will make a world of difference in my life. And I truly appreciate you all. I love you all. On with this review. You're not hallucinating. I decided to turn on the overhead light, and it's the next day. I was filming yesterday, and I did not feel well at all, and my video was subpar in my opinion. So I'm redoing it today in its entirety, except for the intro, of course, and here I am. So let's talk about Dune and my thoughts on the film itself, and that's the wrong Dune. This is the David Lynch Dune. I'm going to just hold this up briefly because it was here. And I just want to say that I rewatched this a couple days ago when I was rewatching part one of Dune, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and part two. And in watching David Lynch's 1984 Dune, it came to my attention that this film could have been right up there with 2001: A Space Odyssey, Planet of the Apes, and Star Wars in terms of a legacy film. Uh, it really had potential, and it shows in this film. And if anyone wants to know more on that, I can do a separate video on David Lynch's Dune and what happened exactly and why it catches so much flack. But that's for a separate video. We're here to talk about Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1 and collectively part two as one piece of art. And the reason I'm saying that is because it really is one film. And it was broken into two parts, mainly because the studio was leery about greenlighting a several hour film or a two-part film at one, initially, until the success of part one was obvious that there was a fan base for this and for part two. I believe that the audience also has really sort of shifted in the past several years. It's become a lot more accepting to two-part stories and trilogies and multi-part films, multi-part series. I think a lot of that has to do with streaming and different TV shows that may or may not have overly complex plot lines and characters, etc. So, with that stated, let us start out with Dune Part 1. I will hold up Part 2 when we get to Part 2, but we are going to start off with Part 1, and when I segue into Part 2, I will hold it up as well. But here we have Part 1. And it starts out with a sort of spoken word segment by Chani, played by Zendaya, and I firmly believe that that segment was put in this film as fan service for Zendaya fans because there was very little Zendaya in part one because there was very little Chani in part one. Chani's character does not come into play in the storyline of Dune until midway through the book. So, having her do the intro was a way of sort of appeasing fans. Because in actuality, the intro should have been done by the Princess Irulan, who is the chronicler of Paul's life, Paul's events, and the events surrounding Paul's legacy and the legacy of Arrakis itself, for that matter, and the Imperium as a whole. So, with that stated, that's my first gripe with regard to Part 1. Part 1 moves along very smoothly. Everyone is on the top of their game in as far as acting and really embodying these characters. And we're first introduced to Paul and Jessica in one of the early scenes on Caladan, following the montage of events that occur on Arrakis prior to the Atreides family, Paul's family, taking control of Arrakis for purposes of spice mining, replacing the Harkonnens temporarily. So we have this sequence with Paul and Jessica and his mother, and she is encouraging him to utilize the voice. It is a Bene Gesserit tool for manipulating people's will, and it's something that she's been training Paul to use, and he's reluctant. It's first thing in the morning, and she's insistent, and like a mother would be, and He does, but not as successfully as he could have. It also reflects his attitude at that point in the story as being more um, adolescent or childlike teenage um, rebelliousness of the character uh, in terms of that point in the story. As in the book, I believe Paul was maybe 16 or 18, I think, at the beginning. I don't recall the exact age. But he was a late teenager, I'm fairly certain. So he was in that stage of rebelliousness and just wanting to be somewhat resistive of um, his mother at that point. But he does comply, and he complies very uh, unsuccessfully. But nonetheless, he's being told he needs to um, get into these formal clothes to receive uh, an emissary from the emperor, who's going to be there to transfer the rights of spice money from the Harkonnens to the Atreides, at which point they would need to relocate to Arrakis. After that sequence takes place, we have um, the famous sequence with the box, which is one of my favorite scenes in every adaptation of Dune. Is it's all done very similarly, but also it's done in each case really well. And in this iteration of Dune, we see Paul putting his hand in the box as the Reverend Mother demands. And in watching David Lynch's Dune prior to this, I noticed that there was a certain direction difference in terms of style. Um, and Timothy Chalamet's Paul moved an awful lot quicker and complied an awful lot easier when the Bene Gesserit told him to sit and put his hand in the box. And it's all very rapid. And I think part of that goes with things being more fast paced these days. Also, part of it had to go and to show us that Paul was resistant to this whole ordeal and to being trained in general. And he doesn't want any part of this. Um, he's a he's a teenager in his mind, and he's questioned, but that's about it. Benny Gesserit mother leaves, has a discussion with Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, regarding her um, having to have born a daughter as opposed to a son. She shouldn't have done what she did and disobeyed the sisterhood, but she did, and we got Paul. So the reason this is an issue is because the Bene Gesserit sisterhood have a well thought out, well planned out series of bloodlines to breed with, and these bloodlines can dictate future children and their place in societal structure in terms of power. And the goal was to have a daughter of the Atreides born to wed the uh, heir of House Harkonnen and sort of seal that families together as one unit. but that did not occur. So the Bene Gesserit are not happy with Lady Jessica at all at that point in time. Uh, Paul's family, Duke Leto, his father, and Lady Jessica, and their accompanying uh, cohorts, um, Gurney Halleck, Thufir Hawat, and Dr. Yui, along with other troops here and there, all depart for Arrakis. And prior to that, Duncan Idaho, played by Jason Momoa, has departed ahead of them. And he is to make contact with the Fremen, the native people of Arrakis, and find out more about them. Find out how they live, how they survive, and find out more about their society because it's really unknown at this point in time. So he's actually gone before they leave for Arrakis. And once they arrive on Arrakis, they they meet back up with him soon thereafter. But one of the things that got to me in this adaptation of Dune was we did not have a space folding sequence, which I feel is important to show how individuals travel from one place to the next without moving and do so very instantaneously. And I think that would have really been important to have. It was sort of glossed over though. I think for the reasons that previous versions of Dune were sort of really chastised in terms of the execution of that in its effect. We have David Lynch's version, which does an interesting job and has some really unique visuals. We also have the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, which also has those elements to it as well. But we skip over that sequence basically, and we are right at Arrakis. And I'm going to try and go through this as quickly as possible because we're already running almost a half hour here. But Paul is discovering that the spice is in everything basically on Arrakis. And technically it's in everything on every world by that point, but it's more subtle. So in concentrated forms, it can definitely make anyone hallucinate or see visions, whatever the case. In Paul's case, he sees a lot more because of his breathing and his stature, but we'll get to that momentarily. So he does become rejoined with Duncan, his friend and teacher, and Duncan basically introduces him and his father and several of the others to one of the Fremen known as Stokar. And it's a very pivotal and moving scene, and it's a scene that's really necessary to show the different customs of the Fremen and how precious moisture and water is to them, that even saliva is considered precious, and to offer it as a gesture of a bond is not frowned upon. If you spit, it's actually it's respected. So Duncan explains that when Stilgar does this because it does appall a few of the people. Um, and Paul is also aware of a lot of this stuff from studying and being aware of the customs of Arrakis. Next, really important sequence is with Paul and the Hunter Seeker, which is when Paul is basically targeted for assassination. Now, there is someone hiding amongst the um, Atreides that is a Harkonnen agent that is going to um, be responsible for bringing down House Atreides. They don't know who it is. They're not even aware of this at this point until this point really. And this hunter seeker is basically a floating syringe that um, is poisonous, and it's in Paul's room, and he sees it, and because of his Bene Gesserit training, he's able to stay extremely still and just watch it. Now, the only thing I have to say about this is also where I have to applaud David Lynch as opposed to Denis Villeneuve's um, portrayal of this scene. As in the Lynch version, to illustrate the non reliance on technology as a result of the Bulgarian Jihad, which was a war that took place against thinking machines years prior. Um, Lynch showed the inner workings of this little tiny device that's floating towards Paul, and it has mechanisms and these like clock-like things moving, and it's really an amazing shot. And it's brief, but it's enough to give you an attention to detail that was really unnecessary, but it really works well to illustrate the opposition to advanced technology and to show that this thing is mechanical. It's not. It's mechanical, but it's not something that is computerized, so to speak. And I think that that was a really nice touch in Lynch's version that was absent from Denny's version. Um, but nonetheless, the scene plays out the same, and Paul is able to save the Fremen coming to his door by redirecting the Hunter Seeker, and because it moves according to any movement in the room. So as soon as it sensed the door opening, it went toward that and gave Paul the ability to grab it and save the person that was entering. So, with that stated, Duke Leto, his father, Oscar Isaac, is not very happy about his son being targeted for assassination. And he orders an immediate investigation into this, um, which really doesn't turn up anything. But that's because of something that I will mention momentarily as well. So, following this, Paul and um, his father and Dr. Kynes of the basically she is the ecologist that was sent by the emperor, and Dr. Kynes in this version is female. Dr. Kynes in the book and in the previous adaptations was male. Now, Dr. Kynes' gender is really unimportant. It's a gender swap that works because it really doesn't affect anything story wise. Um, and as far as Dr. Kynes um, as a character, she's very well done and well played, and she is to take uh, House Atreides on a tour of spice mining to see how it's done. And they fly out to a spice mining operation, and they're told spice mining always attracts worms. They're attracted by rhythmic vibrations, and sandworms are not small; they are huge. So uh, they pretty much attract the worm, and these carryalls are supposed to arrive to carry the uh, cache of spice that was mined away. And the spice is essential to not just as a trippy acid trip type of drug, but it also allows the safe travel through space without moving through space folding. It allows the navigators, so the spice navigators, to navigate through space just by thought alone, and by warping the space around the ship and allowing it to travel through um, space safely. And they're mutated from their their reliance on the spice and their exposure to it, so much so that they are not even remotely human looking. But that's okay. We're not getting into that right now. We're getting into the actual spice mining sequence itself, and the fact that the Duke places more emphasis on the men that are spice mining than the spice itself. And that's important to Dr. Kynes because it shows the kind of character that Leto is and the kind of leader that he is. And uh, when the carryall does not show up and they are tasked with evacuating this crew on the spice mine operation, they do so very rapidly. But in the meantime, Paul is exposed to spice and raw spice and has an extreme vision and almost does not make it, but he is saved and he is brought back to the capital Arakeen, the capital of DUNE, of Arrakis, and he is examined by Dr. Yui, and Dr. Yui basically says he's fine. He just might have a slight allergy. And when the doctor leaves and Paul's just with his mother, he basically confronts her and says, "It's not because I'm allergic, is it?" And she's like, "No, it's not." Um, she doesn't really go into much detail, but she knows that there's more at play there, more going on. She doesn't know to what extent yet, but she does suspect that he may have powers that she did not account for. So, soon thereafter, Duke Leto is betrayed by Dr. Yui, who has let down the defense shield and has been in contact with the Harkonnens, and he tells Leto as he's almost dying that he'll be able to get close to Baron Harkonnen before he actually dies, and they used poison, but it wasn't really a deadly poison at that point. Um, at least not to the extent it could have been. And he installs a poison gas tooth into Leto's mouth so Leto can kill the Baron. Now, there's not a lot of detail or character growth for Dr. Yui, which is my other gripe with part one, because while there wasn't much in the other adaptations as well, we at least got a sense of why Dr. Yui did what he did. It's mentioned, it's kind of glazed over in this version, but his wife was taken by the Harkonnens, and he's not even sure if she's alive, and he is just dealt with very swiftly and eliminated after betraying his Duke. And the Harkonnens take Paul and Jessica into the desert to do away with them, and basically take over Arrakis with the Emperor's help, because the Emperor, of course, is in on this. And um, the Atreides family is basically being massacred by uh, the Emperor's troops and the Harkonnens. And Paul and Jessica manage to um, regain control over the people that are taking them out in the desert to do away with them, and they dispose of them rather quickly. Uh, and it's same as in the other versions. I think it was more effective in the Lynch's version, but that's just me. Um, and it causes a whole another sequence that I don't believe was even in the book to happen. Um, and they land safely following this saving of their lives. And they find that in the ship that they're on, the Ornithopter, it's called, there are the plans, are basically a letter from Dr. Yui, and the Duke's signet ring is there, and still suits to save their lives in the desert. And they are in the desert, and they are um, getting they 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 get everything changed, and Duncan, Idaho, who had escaped the massacre, um, basically takes them to an outpost that was, it's been on the planet for years, an ecological station to study Arrakis years and years ago prior. And this is a scene that was, I think, put in to give Jason Momoa more screen time and more character growth. As with sequels happening, Duncan Idaho does come back. So I think they wanted to give this bond between Paul and Duncan more depth and more credence as opposed to prior. So Duncan gets more screen time, and we get to see Duncan basically get massacred by a bunch of Harkonnen and the Emperor's troops, the Sardaukar. Um, and not before he does arrange for Paul and Jessica to escape again on an ornithopter once again into a sandstorm. And Dr. Kynes tells them to fly up into the storm as high as they could go. Harkonnens will not follow them in because they are afraid of it, and they are very quickly pursued by Harkonnens, and that they make it through. They do crash though, and they very quickly run into the Fremen, and we have a battle that takes place between Paul and one of the Fremen that's challenging him, as he's opposed to Stilgar, who's there, taking these people in because they're not Fremen. Stilgar remembers Paul, knows that he is the heir to the Atreides, and he respects him. So, and he also respects Lady Jessica as in terms of Bene Gesserit. So Paul defeats this Fremen. That's how part one ends, and we move on to part two. In part two, I have less to say about. It's a lot more action oriented, but I will go through and I will give you my opinion on this. So, as you watch this as one movie, as one film, one sitting, it pretty much takes place right where part one leaves off. However, we open with a proper narration from Princess Irulan, played by Florence Pugh, uh, of Midsummer and uh, Black Widow. Um, and Florence Pugh is an amazing actress, and she's amazing as Princess Irulan. Princess Irulan has a small role, but she's really, really required. And having her do the intro in this version, in this segment, I should say, and subsequent areas in the film, is really amazing. And I think it works very well. So um, she gives us the intro, and we have Paul and Lady Jessica being welcomed into the Fremen uh, Sieges, they're called, which is basically their places where they stay, their homes, if you will, but it's in the rock faces, so no one can really see, and they the life of the Fremen is shown how they do things in terms of how they collect water from the dead, as well as from moisture traps, they're called. Um, you get to see a Muad'Dib, which is a mouse that's native to Arrakis, and uh, very pertinent to the story itself. And you get to see all these different things, and you get to see the interaction between Paul and Chani, played by Zendaya, and uh, there is a sort of initial unspoken attraction there. It's played off to some degree, and there is a degree of resistance on Chani's part to accept Paul as being a religious figure, as many of the people see him as. Because the things just years earlier had placed in every world possible this legend of the Kwisatz Haderach, this super being coming that was going to uh, basically change the course of history and um, basically uh, make Arrakis more pertinent to the universe itself, in this case at least. And Shani is opposed to that. She sees the Fremen as being her people, and they're the ones she should be fighting for and living for. Um, and Paul's kind of put secondary to that. Now that's a deviation from the book, because in the books and in previous iterations, Chani's very loyal to Paul. She is loyal to Paul in this, and uh, soon after they're accepted, and soon after Lady Jessica takes the water of life, which she needs to transmute into a safe substance that can then be drunk by all, which is a whole thing in and of itself. Bene Gesserits they're trained, and they're trained very heavily in the use of different poisons, different substances, and how to change them in their bodily structure so that they can survive. and she's able to do it successfully, and she takes the consciousness of previous Bene Gesserit leader, as she's elderly and not doing well at that point. She basically has given her memories her consciousness. Uh, what Lady Jessica fails to tell Fremen, and what only Paul knows, is that Lady Jessica is pregnant with a child from Duke Leto, a daughter, in fact, named Alia. And um, Alia is born, is conceived, and is, when Lady Jessica takes the water of life, Alia is awoken to all of these Bene Gesserit memories, like generations and generations of memories for this child to absorb. And so her brain is already overwhelmed in utero, and it is quite the experience for her, to say the least. We do get to see Paul having a vision of her at one point where she does speak to him, but other than that, we do not see any actual birth of Alia or any other visual um, visualization or realization of Alia as a character other than her being in utero. And that was also a deviation from the source material as well as previous iterations. And I believe it's because they did not want to take risks on a child actor potentially ruining something that had been so well received in terms of part one. And I think that this was a detriment to the film, in my opinion. I think that Alia in David Lynch's Dune was terrifying, and she was really an amazing portrayal of Alia. Same thing with Alia in the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries. But obviously, I am not other people that did not see it the same way. So Alia is kept in utero. She's not brought up really in terms of her birth. So that will happen off screen, presumably, prior to The Messiah, which is greenlit and scheduled to be actually filmed. So that will be the next Dune film we see whenever it does eventually get filmed and take place. But I digress, and I am moving forward. Um, we see the reunion of Gurney Halleck with Paul and Fremen, and um, we see Paul learn how to write a sandworm, which is a Fremen custom, and a rite of passage. And uh, for Paul to fully realize his abilities and his place in Fremen culture, he has to take the water of life. And he's resistant at first to even acknowledge his place as a religious icon to them, because he knows it's all propaganda. But it's really not, because of his lineage and all the breeding that had been done to bring about this Kwisatz Haderach. And by this point, Paul is effectively mastering the voice and his ability to use it to manipulate. And Gurney Halleck says to Paul at one point, you need to embrace who you are. You need to embrace who they think you are, who they believe you to be. And there are two amazing scenes I want to highlight. There is one where Paul goes and, in essence, um, goes to step into the Fremen hierarchy of individuals. And he's held back, saying, you're not one of us. And to become part of our circle, you need to kill Stilgar, who is the leader of that siege, where Paul is being held safely. And uh, Paul makes a good point. He's like, why would I kill one of my best fighters? Um, Someone who has trained me in what to do. I'm not going to kill him. And he gives this incredibly powerful speech. And you can see Chani, Zendaya, becoming very uneasy with how Paul's speaking. Instead of realizing that Paul is doing this for the respect that he needs to gain. So that's kind of a problem I have because she should be smarter than she is. And she should realize that. And Paul could have had a talk with her afterwards, and he actually does. When we get past the Harkonnens coming back to um, uh, Arrakis and taking hold, and when we see Fade Rautha, the Baron Harkonnen's nephew, uh, basically taking over in lieu of his cousin's, his brother, his failure to be able to handle the Fremen. Fade Rautha and um, Paul are basically having a face-off at the end. Now, prior to that is this other amazing speech Paul gives for literally thousands of Fremen. And it's an incredibly powerful scene. It really works well. And it's done in their language, which is really cool. And it really, really is effective. And I think that those two scenes really illustrate how much they can believe if really shown the way. And Paul is fully embracing his what he needs to do in order to get things done, and that is to basically take the control away from the emperor and become emperor in essence. And he talks the emperor down right in front of the emperor, and basically puts him down and says, "Listen, I'm going to marry your daughter. She's going to be my empress, and you're going to give the throne to me." And the emperor is not in favor of this whatsoever. And Paul faces off against Fade. And it's in a great, great sequence with Paul and Fade. They fight together with knives, and Paul succeeds in conquering Fade and basically killing Fade. And the Princess Irulan begs Paul not to kill her father, and she will gladly marry him and make him emperor. And he agrees, basically. He takes her, and prior to this, Paul did say to Chani, "Whatever happens, I love you, and you are the only woman in my life for me." And Paul's father, Duke Leto, took Lady Jessica as his concubine, not as his wife. So Lady Jessica was not royal. She was a bound concubine, and that's what Chani would be. But Chani, even though Paul declared his love for Chani, and even though it's quite clear Paul is doing this for the people of Arrakis, her people, and the people of the entire galaxy and universe, for that matter, Chani walks off, is not happy with this situation, with this arrangement, and uh, Shawnee takes off on a sandworm by herself into the desert, and the film ends. And yes, I did skip over a lot, but in summarizing two extremely long films, it's hard to do so without skipping over a lot. Is Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1 and Part 2, if I can grab it. Part 2? Are they the definitive adaptation of Dune in terms of accuracy, in terms of book to screen adaptation? Yes and no. I mentioned some of the elements that were added, some of the elements that were omitted. One of my biggest problems with part two is the omission of Alia being born and Alia being in the film, because I feel like it could have been done really successfully, especially in this point in time with a lot of child actors being real praised for their performances. Chani's um, devotion more to her people than to the man that she loves. That one point when Paul takes the water of life and goes into a coma, um, he presumably does so without Chani's knowledge, which was wrong. And Chani awakens him, and after several some time of being in a coma, and after she does so, and after everyone else is bowing their heads and rejoice that he's been awakened after seeing within and seeing all these visions of the Bene Gesserit past and future, basically solidifying his role as the Kwisatz Haderach. Chani slaps Paul, and I thought that was kind of disrespectful, but I mean, yes, he didn't tell her, presumably. We don't really know what happens off screen, though. So she may have known. But when she finds out from the people that are there that he drank the water of life, she saves him and slaps him and walks away. Um, as opposed to saying, listen, after slapping him, holding him maybe and saying, I understand you did what you had to do, or something. Something like that. That bothered me. Also, prior to the fight between Paul and Fade, Paul um, ends the life of Baron Harkonnen, and he does acknowledge him as his grandfather, which he is. And that's something that was in the Sci-Fi Channel version. It was not in the Lynch version, to my knowledge, as far as what I can recall from a couple days ago of rewatching it. But he does away with the Baron, because the Baron is not a good person at all, and Baron would be uh, horrible to have around. Um, so he's dealt with as his fate, and there was another sequence that took place earlier on the film I'll briefly mention, where Lady Fenring, who is a Bene Gesserit, but she's also either the wife or concubine. I believe she's the wife of Count Fenring, who we do not see, Helen Fennering was a failed Kwisatz Haderach, but Lady Fennering uh, is an adept of Bene Gesserit, and she visits the planet of Gidi Prime, the home of the House Harkonnen, and witnesses a fight of Fade on his birthday. And she basically uses her powers of seduction and makes it well known to her colleagues once she returns that she was successful in conceiving a child by Fade. So it's kind of um, interesting to ponder how that's going to pan out in the future of the Dune universe. There you have Dunes Part 1 and 2. And like I said, Danny Villeneuve's Dune, even though it is great, and even though it is an extremely well executed, well cast, well directed film, um, it is not my favorite adaptation of Dune. It is one of my favorite films in modern day cinema, and especially one of my favorite science fiction films. Uh, my favorite science fiction film of all time, however, is still held by David Lynch's Dune, which really changed my life when I saw this film. As I saw it, I was like 12 years old, maybe 13 at the oldest, and this film made me look at the world differently. It made me look at life differently, and it really changed me. And it also encouraged me to read the books because I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn more. At that point in time, book to film uh, liberties were really uh, abundant. So the fact that Lynch took some liberties and that the producers, Dino De Laurentiis and more specifically Raphael De Laurentiis, Dino's daughter, took as many liberties as they did in terms of cutting the film and editing the film, it still to me is my favorite film of all time. What is the definitive Dune as far as the actual story goes? And I have to give that to the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries, which is behind me on my shelf, um, on Blu-ray, because they did the best. They covered all aspects of the book. Of course, it is a, I believe, 6-hour miniseries, but it still did it well, and the casting could have been better to some degree, but it could have been worse as well. They did a great job on a very small budget, and the sequel, Children of Dune, was amazing, incorporating elements of Dune Messiah along with Children of Dune as one cohesive story. Amazing. I highly recommend it. And I'm going to close off this review of Denis Villeneuve's Dune with pictures of all my uh, Dune Blu-rays. I'm only missing the David Lynch unofficial extended cut, which is more common overseas than it is here in the States. I don't even think I could find it on Blu-ray region free in the States. If anyone knows how I can get the extended cut, which where David Lynch had his name changed to Alan Smithy and Judas Booth, please let me know because I would want to get that on Blu-ray to add to my Dune collection. That way it's complete, at least in my eyes. Because right now it's incomplete until I have that. I do have it on DVD as part of the Universal collection, and its issuing of the double-sided Dune which I can't stand double-sided discs. So that was problematic for me. I also have a bootlegged import. I don't even know what it is, called DUNE. So that one is the extended cut as well. But I do not have the extended cut on Blu-ray, which is really sort of the nagging piece in my mind. It's something that I really would like to have. Or even the fan edit of Doom, which replaces many of the cutscenes more than the extended cut even did. That'd be amazing to have. So if anyone knows how I can obtain any of these, please let me know in the comment section or message me privately via the Facebook link in the description. Also, you're welcome to email me. My email is also in the description. But I prefer a Facebook message as opposed to email, as it's less likely to end up filtered into spam if I get it on Facebook, and I can check it easier there as well. So I hope you appreciated this comprehensive yet abridged version of They Don't Know If It's Doom. My opinions on it, my problems with it, but is it a great film? Yes, it is. As one cohesive whole, it is a phenomenal film, a phenomenal achievement for modern cinema, and it definitely succeeded in making Dune successful. Something that David Lynch wasn't unable to do due to studio and production interference, and even Jodorowsky prior to that in the 1970s. Um, you know, there have been attempts in the past going back to the 1960s, and we finally have a successful Dune with some minor concessions to the actual story itself, but most of the concessions work in terms of either things being added or subtracted. I have problems with them myself to some degree in terms of certain ones working better than others, but that's me. So, this is Rob with Media Awareness, and I will see you all again soon. Once again, a reminder: the fundraiser continues. Any and all help is welcome, and I will do any requests on any additional Doom videos that you'd like me to do. Please just put that in the comment section, or like I said, in a private message via Facebook or email, either or, and I will do what I can do. Have a wonderful morning, noon, or night, wherever you are. Take care. Bye.